We are in chapter 42 of the Tanya. Thank you for joining us. We're learning about knowing and how to know God. And by knowing, the Alter Rebbe means internalizing information such that I create emotions. Internalizing information such that I create emotions. So it's one thing to learn our Kabbalistic text and to learn all these terms and the levels of creation and what the spiritual worlds consist of. But it's another for that information to make its way down the pathway to my heart and to create emotions. And for that, I need what we call dot knowledge. And specifically, we're looking at dot that creates this first primary spiritual emotion of yira, which we'll call reverence today, reverence. So if I don't have a sense of reverence, I may enjoy the meditations that we've learned. I may enjoy the sense of spiritual connection. But that love, that chesed flow, perhaps we're missing something because it's missing that bitul, that self-nullification that comes from a feeling of reverence. When I revere something, when something else is so important to me that my ego vanishes, now the Alter Rebbe says I can have a state where holiness can rest on me. Whereas if I skip over that, if I don't have a sense of yira, of reverence, now I may be building a love for God, a love for spirituality, but there's a little bit of ego always there. And where there's ego, there can't be holiness. Our chapter began by the Alter Rebbe saying, and this is an easy thing. Moshe says, all God asks of you is to fear God. And the Alter Rebbe says, hard stop. What do you mean that's all God wants of us? As if it's a small thing. And then the Alter Rebbe answered, yes, it's a small thing for Moshe. However, that still presents a problem because you and I are not Moshe. That's Moshe talking. And the answer is yes, you and I are not Moshe, but you and I have a little mini Moshe within us. Every single Jewish person has a flow of the dot from Moshe, because Moshe is called the faithful shepherd, the shepherd that brings knowledge, that brings dot, connection to these ideas, so they're palpable to every single Jew. So because it's easy for Moshe, each one of us can do it because we have a mini Moshe within us. Second part is, not only do we have a flow from Moshe, in every generation, there are leaders of our people Israel, the Jewish people, that are like sparks of Moshe that God has cast into every generation that also help us connect with the flow of dot, of connecting to an idea, to an abstract concept. And third is what we're working on now, which is each of us needs to sit and learn to meditate, which is a Jewish practice, traditional Jewish practice, and very, very spiritual, such that we engage and grow our own power of dot, so that these abstract concepts we've been learning become as real to us as a car speeding down the road. I don't step in front of it. I have natural fear. As real to us as the Delta variant, right? So I was at temple, I had a mask on, right? I have a natural inborn fear of things that are real to me, and I want to create such a real fear out of these abstract concepts. So it engages just my normal human capacity for reverence, we're calling it, not fear. And that meditation has, we said, three aspects compared to the Bina meditation we learned about. So if you've been with us, you know about Chochman Bina, about inspiration and then cogitation, conscious thought. When we meditate on the side of Bina, of cogitation and conscious thought, there you meditate until you fix the idea in your mind and it's clear, and perhaps then you move on to another concept. Or perhaps you go deeper, but you're still working with Bina. When you're working with dot, you have to do it on a regular basis, A. You have to do it for a longer time, B, because you're trying to connect yourself to the information. And C, it has to be subjective, not objective. It has to be personal to me. It has to affect me. So the kind of meditations that we're doing now, as you saw in the beginning of chapter 41, where I picture God standing right in front of me, I say, as if I'm standing directly in front of the king who's searching my mind and my heart and my guts to see, am I serving properly at every moment? We want to have that kind of meditation so that I feel this connection to this abstract concept we're calling Ein Sof, or God, or whatever term you're comfortable with. And finally, there's two stages to that work of meditation. One, as we learned, is I want to delegitimize and deprioritize any of my physical drives. That might be a physical drive for food. It might be a physical drive for sleep. It might be a physical drive for physical affection, or whatever signals your physical body is sending you as being, that's what I want next. We don't have to just decouple from it. We don't have to run away from it. I just want to turn it down. Say that's not so important. What's important is my connection to God and my connection to my soul. So that's one, is turning down the importance of the body's drives. And then two is sitting and actually doing work, meditating as we're learning. And finally, we looked at this sense of understanding how God can know everything, because this abstract concept is based on the idea that God is aware of me. God is watching me. God is always right in front of me, looking to see how well am I behaving, how well am I treating the other divinely placed creatures that are around me, the other people, the other objects. How well am I doing? Am I serving God, aware that God is, it's important to God that I do it? And so the Alter Rebbe says, it's hard for us who use our eyes to see things to imagine that God can see us, because we know God doesn't have an eye. God doesn't need eyes to see. And the Alter Rebbe gave us a mashal, and this won't be posted. So last class, unfortunately, the video got interrupted, so it wasn't posted. So I'll just go through quickly now for anyone who wants to catch up with us. The Alter Rebbe said, it's like a person knows what's going on inside their body. So I know right now whether my feet are crossed or my feet are flat, because they're my feet. I know what they are. And if I stub my toe, I know I stubbed my toe. I don't have to see it. It's my body. So just like a person knows what's happening inside their body because it's them, that's how God knows what's happening in the world. So when we say God sees us, it's a way to describe something that's hard for us to understand. But God doesn't need to see us with an eye. God knows us the same way I know that I have clothes on. I can feel it. The same way I know if I have a headache, God forbid, I know it because I feel it. So every piece of the world is contained within God, and God is infinitely aware of every detail, much, much more than someone looking at something that's only aware of it as a medium for something outside itself. So that is, when we say God is looking at us, of course, no one thinks God has some body out somewhere in the heavens and is looking at us with a divine eye. It's just that the whole world is God and is contained in God, and God's completely aware of everything within God, to every detail. And so God's aware of me and is needing me to serve God in whatever way today brings. Let's start at the top of page 640. We're in this Kahot edition of the Tanya, if you want to order it. And when we post these, we also put the text online. So please join us. וכאין ידיעה זו על דרך משל יודע הקדוש ברוך הוא על כל הנפעל בכל הנבראים עליונים ותחתונים להיות כולם מושפעים ממנו יתברך כמו שכתוב כי ממך הכל.
In a similar manner of knowledge, by way of analogy, God knows all that befalls all created beings of both higher and lower worlds, because they all receive their flow of life from him, as it is written, for from you come all things.
And let's do the next paragraph. There's a typo. It should be brain, not train, but go ahead. Just as the train, which is the source of life for the whole body, just as the brain, which is the source of life for the whole body, knows what transpires within it, so too does God, the source of all life, know what is happening with all of creation. Exactly. So if you can zone in on your brain that is aware of everything happening in the body, directs everything happening in the body, sends life force to everything happening in the body through our nervous system. That's the relationship that God has with the whole world. It's like if God is the brain of the universe, that brain is aware of everything and in fact is the life force of everything. God's awareness of me is my actual soul, is who I am, is my vitality. So I know sometimes we have trouble because we can't see God and because God doesn't have a body. And we don't relate to God like other beings. We have trouble relating to this abstract concept of this divine, this one unity, because I have no way of relating to something that's that abstract. But saying, well, could God be aware of me, or can God really have conscious thought? Does God have a sense of humor? Could God beat me at checkers? Right? Asking these questions. If you look at the reality of Kabbalah, that my entire soul, all it is God's awareness of me and God's wanting there to be a Michael Smolash. That is my soul. That is my life force. Everything I'm doing is flowing from that. How could we even ask, is God aware of what I'm thinking or feeling or doing? Or does God have enough intellect to play a game of tic-tac-toe? Right? So this idea that God is diminished to be just some vague life force in the universe, that is blocking out, that is missing the Kabbalah reality that every being that exists, its only reality flows from God's knowledge of it. That is the life force of everything from this pencil to the planet to me and you. So of course, God is completely aware, much more than we are, of everything that we're doing consciously and subconsciously, everything that's happening and why. And from the Kabbalah's perspective, there's no question that God is completely aware of us, just like, and even more than I am aware of everything happening in my body. I think that's a very important point. So I'd love to open it to questions or discussions. Is that you find that difficult to internalize? Is that a foreign concept? Does that make sense, and just lands for you or doesn't land? How does that land for you? Rick's giving me his I don't know face. He always giving me that face like 10 minutes before he agrees with I put it up. So no arguments, no comments. Let me check.
I'll comment.
Go ahead.
I always felt that there was a piece of God within me.
Sure.
So it's nice to hear it verified.
There you go. So many of us have just an inner knowing that there's a piece of God within us. But we go even deeper. We say, it's not there's a piece of God within me, it's that everything I am is actually just God's knowledge of me. Everything I am is God's knowledge of me. There's no reality I have outside of that. So if that's the concept that I'm really connecting to, and if I really feel about the world in that lens, through that lens, now I have no question, is God aware? Because the only question is really, am I aware of what God's thinking? Right? How well can I follow God's train of thought in what God has happening within me emotionally, what God, what divine providence is happening with my body and my health, what's happening with the world around me. I'm trying to follow God's train of thought, but there's nothing in me that has any reality outside of God's knowledge of me. That is what my soul is. That's my definition. Right? So the question, can God be aware of what I'm thinking and doing that's gone in my mind? It's just how much of what God is aware of can I now try and catch and use my mission here in the world? Yeah, Cindy? Something's on your mind, no?
I just think about if that's the case, and then we have like negative emotions that are so far from what the divine soul should be doing. We do this work, and yet the animal soul still has such a powerful hold. That's what's going through my mind.
Yeah, that's where God's midah of gevura, God's emotion of restraint, comes in. So God's imagining and wanting there to be a Michael Smolash. God's also wanting Michael Smolash to not be aware, for it to not be obvious that all Michael is a ray coming out of this infinite light, that there is no Michael, that Michael's whole being is just godliness. But God wants Michael to have free will and to act as if Michael can just decide whatever Michael wants based on Michael's ego. So that's where Gevura comes in, and God shields that oneness and that reality. And now here I am. I can make my own decisions. But that doesn't change. It's still God's chesed creating me, and God's Gevura, that's the shield in front of that chesed, like the sun and the shield we learned about in Shari Phenomena, if you were with us. And it's up to me now to take that abstract concept that's hidden from me, that's not obvious, and make it obvious emotionally. But yeah, so free will exists because that's what God wants there to be. It's no different, you know. It's a big one to take in, and it's a whole game changer. It's a whole game changer. Going on. וזהו שאומרים וגם כל היצור לא נכחד ממך.
And this is the
I think Ruth now. Ruth, why don't you go ahead?
Musa.
And this is the meaning of what we say, and no creature is hidden from you, inasmuch as all created beings emanate from him.
Right, so this is from the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, as he wrote. No creature is hidden from you. Like, we can imagine if no one's around, if I'm just in the woods, if I'm in a different city, you know, who's going to know? No one's going to remember. It wasn't caught on camera. But who are we kidding? If there's one infinite Ein Sof, and that's the life force and soul of everything, then everything is remembered, everything is written down, everything is in God's awareness. כמו שכתב הרמב"ם, והסכימו לזה חכמי הקבלה, כמו שכתב הרמ"ק בפרדס. Eleanor, will you go ahead?
And as Maimonides, speaking as the philosopher, has said, and this has been agreed to by the scholars of Kabbalah, as Rabbi Moshe Cordovero writes in Pardes.
Yeah, Cordovero, very good. And we've revisited this many times. Maimonides says God is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. So I think there's a me, and there's something called knowing something, and then there's a God who knows me through the capacity of being able to know. 3 compartments. So me, knowledge, and God. And in my world, those are always 3 separate things, right? I don't know Russian, but I could learn Russian. There's me, there's Russian, and there's my being able to learn. They're 3 separate things. With God, they're all one thing. God is the knowledge, knower, and known. There's no distinction. There's no separation. There is distinction. There's no separation. It's all one being. And so how does God know anything in the world? Because when God knows something, that is also God. You can't chop God up like we are composite beings. God is not a composite being. God is a total unity. So the fact that God knows me is because God knows God's self, and there's no distinction. And he doesn't say it here, but Maimonides says right after, and no human being can understand this, right? So you kind of scratch your heads hearing it, trying to squeeze that into your brain. God's the knowledge, the knower, the known. And we're so embedded in duality that we cannot process that. Even Maimonides, one of the greatest minds of all time, no one can process that, but it's true. שבדיעת עצמו כביכול יודע כל הנבראים הנמצאים מאמיתת המצאו וכו'.
That by knowing himself, as it were, he knows all created things whose source of existence is his true existence.
So now we're going to have one caveat, and then we're going to move to the next topic. The caveat is, yes, you can say God knows the world the same way you know what's happening in your body. But the Alter Rebbe wants to make sure we don't take that too far, because the issue is, if I burn my finger, my soul is in pain. Right? If I light a match and my fingers are too long, ow, my soul feels pain, my soul is affected. And God forbid I put my finger into the wrong place and a piece of it gets cut off. Now my soul's affected again. It lost connection with that part of my body, and it's forever changed. And if something emotional happens in the world that causes me grief, you know, I lose someone close to me, God forbid, now my soul is affected. It has sorrow, it's changed. And if a baby's born, God willing, now my soul is forever changed. I have this joy and this oneness. So one of the key ideas that goes along with the way my soul fills my body is that my soul is changed by what happens to my body, emotionally, physically, everything. So with this mashal, with this metaphor, we should be careful to make sure we don't get confused and think God is like that, because God is still the same exactly before the universe was created now. God now is not changed in any way by the creation of the whole cosmos, physical and spiritual worlds. So that is a key distinction. And let's go in the Alter Rebbe's words. Rak shemashal ze'eno ela l'shakech et ha'ozen aval be'emet ein hamashal dome la'nimshal klal.
This analogy of soul and body, however, is only to calm the ear, to make it possible for man's ear and intellect to perceive how one may know about something without having to actually see or hear it. In truth, however, the analogy of soul and body bears no similarity at all to the analog of godliness and creation.
In creation. Get it? So the analogy is to explain God can see us, God can hear us without God needing to have eyes and ears. But we shouldn't infer from the analogy that if something happens in the world, God is changed, God is surprised, God didn't know, God is God, etc. God is unified and unchanged and unaffected the way a body is affected, the way a soul is affected by the events that happen in the body.
So is he saying that God doesn't know our soul? No, he's not saying
No,
that.
that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's saying. It's the opposite. God knows our souls and our bodies, everything happening. But what doesn't happen is that doesn't create a change in God. And that's not something we can understand, right? Because when something happens in the world and I learn about it, it creates a change in me automatically. That's just how knowledge works with us. So it's hard for us to imagine that I have free will and I could decide to do something terrible today, and that could create all kinds of pain in the world, and yet that doesn't change God. There could be a war and thousands of people perish, and that doesn't change God. World peace could come, and that doesn't change God. So that's another, we can't compute how it's possible for God to have complete knowledge of everything, and yet that knowledge of God being the soul that fills the universe doesn't affect God or change God in any way. There's an entire cosmos, God's still not changed. Entire cosmos reverts out of ever existing, God's still not changed, right? The greatest change we can imagine, the entire cosmos never having existed, would still not change God. God's the same. So that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. God definitely knows our souls and our bodies and everything happening, but that knowledge doesn't create a change the way us knowing something creates a change in our soul. Yeah? It's a side point, it's a caveat. We don't have to go too deep into this, and it's incomprehensible, even as we say it, right? Yes, Eleanor?
Just from things you've said in the past, though, God could feel bad that there's a war, or he's not changed.
Okay, so on the one hand, I know I've said that we have a feeling of love, chesed, and that's limited, and God has infinite chesed. So God, you can't imagine the power of love that God feels for us. And I mean, a couple gets married and God feels love. So is that a change in God?
Right.
Seems like it. I'm saying now God has love because something happened, right? And similarly, pain. We say, we have grief at something that happens when someone's suffering. Well, God has infinite compassion, so God has my grief times infinity. And I can't imagine the grief God feels when I allow something to happen where someone's suffering when I could have helped it, right? So that is true, but it's also true that reality does not create a change in God. And for us, that's a paradox, right? It's, well, either now God's feeling pain that God didn't feel yesterday, or God changed, right? So it's a paradox. And it's because we're stuck in time. I don't want to start moving toothpicks around on a table, but right, we're looking at time like this, where we're moving through time, and something happens and suddenly we're changed. God is up here looking at all of time all at the same time. So God, even though some suffering happened yesterday that I know now happened, and there may be some suffering tomorrow that I don't know about, and that's going to change me, God sees all time at once. So really, the compassion that God is feeling was always there within God, and God hasn't changed. It looks to us like a created being like God must have changed, but that's the best way I know to overcome the paradox, but it never really makes sense. So I hear what you're saying. God has more feelings about things than I do, and They seem to come and go with time, and yet at the same time, God is completely unchanged by anything happening in the universe, and that's a human paradox. Let's not get mired. And this could go. We could spend any length of time on that topic, right? Ki nefesh adam afilu hasichlit ve'elokit hi mitpaelet mi meorei haguf v'tzaro mechamat hitlabshuta mamash b'nefesh achiunit ha'melubeshet baguf mamash. Paula, for the human soul. Oh, if you will unmute for us. I think you're still muted, Paula. Oh, actually, you're not unmuted, but I can't hear you. Is your mic turned off? Yeah, I can't hear you. Let's come back to you. If you can see if your mic is disconnected, we can't hear. Let's go back to Cindy. Sorry about that.
For the human soul, even the rational and the divine soul is affected by the events which transpire with the body and its pain by reason of its, the rational and divine souls, being actually clothed within the vivifying soul. That is, the soul which provides the body with physical life, which in turn is clothed in the body itself.
And so we've learned about the divine soul, the animal soul, that is sometimes called the vivifying soul, and they're all nested within each other, clothed within each other. So my animal soul is enclosed in my body, animating it and relating to it. My divine soul is clothed within the animal soul, also trying to guide it and give it a compass bearing. And ultimately, it's all changed by everything happening in the body. God, however, aval hakadosh baruch hu eino mitpael chas v'shalom mimeorei haolam v'shinuyav v'lo mehaolam atzmo. Ruth, go ahead. God, however.
Okay. God, however, is not, heaven forbid, affected by the events of the world and its changes, nor by the world itself.
So God is not like us in that sense. God's completely aware, but unchanged. Shekulam einan palim bo shum shinui chas v'shalom.
None of them affect any change in him, God forbid, nor in his absolute unity. Just as he was one and unified before he created them, so too does he remain one and unified after their creation.
And if we want to argue or look deeper, now the author will refer us elsewhere. I'm not getting into it here. It's been treated at length elsewhere. But then he'll say, even though you can't understand it, our capacity of faith, which is the highest capacity, can perceive it. It can perceive it. So even though my rational brain will never, that will always be a paradox, I have something called emunah, faith, which is above my rational capacity. And that can assert and perceive and know, in fact, that yes, God knows everything and yet is unchanged. And to our discussion, because my emunah, my faith can perceive it, now I can have that emunah flow and connect to my sense of dot, my knowledge, and I can live my life with the feelings that that is real as the Delta variant, as real as a car coming down the street. And so I can live my life that, yes, God is aware of everything I'm doing, and therefore I should at least behave as if, say, a 9-year-old in the supermarket is looking at me and I wouldn't do anything untoward. I would behave properly. At least that much self-control, because I know that God is watching me, right? And that's called yirat tata. That's the lower level reverence, lower level fear, quote unquote. והנה כדי להשכיל זה היטב בספרינו כבר הערכו חכמי האמת בספריהם.
In order to help us understand this well with our intelligence, the scholars of truth, that is the Kabbalists, have already treated it at length in their books, and an explanation will be found there.
Right, so good luck if you want to take that on as a field of study. Ach kol Yisrael maminim b'nei maminim bli shum chakirat sechel enoshi ve'omrim atahu ad shelo nivra haolam v'chulu.
However, all Jews, as descendants of the patriarchs who believe in God, are believers, descendants of believers, without any speculation of mortal intellect whatsoever, and they declare you were the same before the world was created, and so forth.
And so that's part of our morning tefillah. It might be familiar. You are the same before the world was created, and after the world was created, you're still the same. So it is not a field of intellect where I can figure that out and I can connect the dots rationally. It's a field of faith where I can just assert very simply, my faith is able to know and perceive that God is the same now. God knows everything and yet is unchanged. And then I can let that emunah flow into my dot through meditation. And something that I can't understand, I can still have feelings about as if I see with my physical eyes. That takes work. Kaniskar La'el Perichet has been explained above in chapter 20. Paula, did you figure out your mic? Are you able to, can we hear you now? Let me know. I'll because I can't hear you speaking now, just so you know. Yeah, so let us know. You look like you're on, but I don't hear you. So if you can, maybe if you can figure it out, let me know. Otherwise, let's skip for now. Apologies. Let's go on a bit more. והנה כל אדם ישראל יהיה מי שיתבונן בזה שעה גדולה בכל יום, איך שהקדוש ברוך הוא מלא ממש את העולמים ואת התמים, השמיים והארץ ממש, מלוך על ארץ כבודו ממש. So here we get to our work of meditating on this idea that God fills the world, knows everything that's happening, including me. Go ahead, Cindy.
Now, therefore, each individual Jew, whoever he may be, that is, whatever his spiritual state, when he ponders upon this for considerable time each day, how God is truly omnipresent in the higher and lower worlds, and that the actual heaven and earth, not only the spiritual heaven and earth, the supernal sphirot, but the actual heaven and earth itself is truly filled with his glory.
So this is the meditation that we want to do in the morning. And the Alter Rebbe will explain now how we use it for the rest of the day. And by the way, a good time to pause to mention this is a big yard site today, a big anniversary of the passing of the last Rebbe of this system, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. His father, Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, was a big Kabbalist. So we just mentioned the Zohar. He was a major receiver and teacher of the true Kabbalistic tradition, and obviously passed that on to his son, who became the Rebbe, and he was a descendant of one of the earlier Rebbes, although he wasn't a Rebbe. But he was chief rabbi in Yekaterinoslav, where my mother's family lived, so I have descendants that were in his community when he was chief rabbi, and this is his yard site. He passed away in 1944. He had been basically kidnapped by the Russian government for subversive activity, which means basically living a Jewish life and teaching kids Judaism, right? That was criminal subversion then, but he did it fearlessly, and he was imprisoned and tortured for about a year, and then finally, when he was released in exile. He couldn't go back to the community. So imagine, our head rabbi, for fundraising or for doing Sunday school, the government kidnaps them, tortures them for a year, and then says, you're free, but you got to go to Alaska instead of back to your community. That was his reality. And when he went to, when he was in exile, so to speak, he was only able to bring with him 2 books. One of them was a Tanya, and not our beautiful 5-volume edition. Just a little Tanya, probably looked like this and about that thick, right? Just the Hebrew. And he also took a copy of the Zohar. Those are the 2 books he took. Of course, this is a man that knew Torah by heart, probably knew Shas by heart, right? Amazing genius. So he could learn by himself without having the text. But what he took with him was the Tanya and the Zohar. And because he had no paper where he was living, there was nothing available. The Torah thoughts that he came up with and taught, he only wrote down in the margins of those 2 books, if you can imagine. So comments on the Tanya, comments on the Zohar, profound Kabbalistic insights, just Torah thoughts of all kinds. They were all contained in these 2 books, a Zohar and a Tanya, just in the margins. And because he had no paper, he wrote them in very, very compact note form. So, he'd make notes for everything. And you had to know how he thought to begin with. to even understand what he was writing about. So we started putting out an English compilation of those Torah meditations. If you email me, I can share with you where you get them. You got to go to the website and sign up. But this is his yard site, so a very good time to be learning a little bit of Zohar in here and learning the Tanya, which was his life's passion. So how this works is, I want to meditate in the morning for as much time, as I said, a sha'ah gedolah, like a regular, repeated amount of time that affects me. And for me, maybe that's an hour and a half, and for you, maybe it's 5 minutes, because maybe this all touches you more easily, right? But whatever that amount of time is, so that it starts to affect you, that's the amount of time you need on a regular basis. So ideally every day. And if I do that in the morning, and I sit and I focus with a dot meditation, which, as we said, like the one we learned in chapter 41, where God's watching me, God needs me to serve properly. God's checking my heart, my mind, my guts. Am I serving properly? Until I feel a sense of, whoa, this really is important, right? If I do that in the morning, so I feel, now I'll have that touch point for the rest of the day. And now for the rest of the day, I won't need to sit before I do something for another 20 minutes or another hour. I can just bring my mind back to that morning meditation. And those emotions, you'll find, are now accessible and available. And so if there's something that I said I would do that I know is important but not urgent, and I want to get it done today, and you know what? I just feel like having another coffee or taking a nap instead. Go back to that morning. I remember how important this idea, this concept of God watching me was, and the reverence I felt and the love I felt. Okay, never mind the coffee or the nap. Let me help this person. Let me do this thing. It'll get me through that weak moment, perhaps. Or if there's something I said I wouldn't do. Oh, have I got a story I heard about Shlomo, right? And wouldn't it be fun to tell that at the cooler at the office today about what happened? And maybe it's a little embarrassing, maybe it isn't, but boy, it would feel good to tell it. Maybe I've said I'm not going to use speech that way. I'm not going to talk about other people just for my own pleasure, but maybe I really want to. So what do? When I go to the cooler and my colleagues are around and I have that feeling of now's the time to really tell that story, I go back to that feeling I had in the morning, that dot, that connection to that idea that God's watching. God put those people here. God put that situation in my mind to check, am I going to do the right thing or the wrong thing? I'm going to give up my pleasure of telling the story, perhaps, to have a sense of reverence that speech is there for me to help people around me, not to say maybe a little embarrassing things about them to get a laugh. So we use that morning meditation, we use it throughout the day as a touchstone, a touch point, to get ourselves back and to channel those spiritual emotions, so that now I'm behaving, as we said, as if at least a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old is watching me to see what I do and what I don't do. In the altar of his words, Vitzofe umabit v'chen kliotav v'libo kol masav v'diburav v'chot se'adav yispor. And that,
me, I think. And that he looks, seeks, and searches his Kenyan heart, that is his inner thoughts and emotions, and all his actions and words, and counts his every step.
right? So that as I often think, that phone is still going, right? I left someone a message. I thought I hung up, but that phone's still going. Whatever I say about my friend, it's on the message. They're hearing it, right? Oh my God, what did I say? Right? Suddenly I'm afraid. Suddenly I've got reverence, right? So that message is always running, right? It's all left on a message to God, and God's hearing everything we say, we think, we feel, we do. It's all on a record somewhere, right? And God's completely aware. So if that embarrasses me a little, good. I should keep that in mind so it affects how I behave. So I feel a sense of reverence. Azai tikava b'libo ha'ira lechol hayam kulo she'yachazor v'yitbonen baze afilu pitbonenut hala. Eleanor, go ahead.
Then fear will be implanted in his heart throughout the day, even when he is occupied with other matters and cannot contemplate the above. When he will again meditate on this, even with a superficial reflection, that does not demand a particular effort and a set time.
So this is the hallmark of Jewish meditation. For those of us who have perhaps done, I've done Zen meditation for many years. or other Eastern styles, where there's often a sense of detachment. There's often a sense of really separating oneself from life for perhaps a day, perhaps weeks, perhaps even months, to attain a certain state, and then kind of you never really want to reattach to the world. There's always a sense of detachment. It's the opposite in Judaism. Meditate in the morning, but what's the point of that meditation? Why am I meditating? Because I'm engaging in the world, right? God, I want to make a home for God in the world. God's not interested in the spiritual side. God's interested in a home in the physical world. So I will engage in the physical world, and that's why I meditated. So now I'm at the office, and the fur is flying, and you know, tempers are maybe starting to rise. That's when I revisit my meditation from the morning. I take my deep breaths. I open my wisdom gateway. I connect to that sense that it's all one. God's watching me. We're all raised from the same source. And just in that superficial meditation, I re-engage with those emotions that I anchored in the morning. And now I engage in the world. I attach to the world, and I do my part to fix the world with my newfound emotions. And I do the opposite of what my instincts and my animal soul was saying. And it's not just, okay, you know, that's a shortcut. We're gonna just, you know, we don't have time in the day to meditate, so we're just gonna meditate in the morning, and I don't have time to do a full half hour in the afternoon, so instead I'll just touch it. That's the whole point of the meditation. The point of the meditation is not to stay in the spiritual realm and detach from the world. The point is to bring those emotions, that sense of that this affects me, now into my life to create a home for God. So those moments, look for them in the day when I need to revisit my morning meditation and reconnect to those emotions, and now change my response to what God has put around me. That's the whole why of meditation. That's when it lands. That's when it has purpose. So look for those moments and try and keep track. בכל עת ובכל שעה יהיה סומר רב עשה טוב במחשבה דיבור מעשה שלא למרות חס ושלום הנה כבודו אשר מלא כל הארץ.
At any time or moment, he will thus turn away from evil and do good. He will refrain from transgressing negative commandments and perform positive commandments in thoughts, speech, and deed, so as not to rebel, God forbid, in the sight of his glory, whereof the whole world is filled.
Unless we think doing mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs, and avoiding negative mitzvahs is a very technical, traditional statement. I'll remind you what we say often, that loving another Jew is a positive mitzvah, right? That expressing anger of any kind is like idol worship, is the biggest negative mitzvah. So just those two, right? Just those two. If I could be aware that at all times I need to be loving a fellow Jew, that's a positive commandment. And at no time can I ever express anger, even if it seems or is justified. That's an avera that I should avoid at all times. If I can just be so quote unquote orthodox about those two commandments, imagine how much the whole Jewish community would change. So yes, go ahead and pick your favorite technical mitzvahs and feel free to do them. We love that. It creates a home for God in the world. Yes, pick your category of negative commandments that you want to work on avoiding, whatever that might be, whether it's diet or whether it's Chabad or whether it's speech, whatever it is. But don't forget all these emotional commandments: to love God, to have awe of God, to love another Jew, to never express anger, to honor your parents, to be involved with the community. Almost everything we do that we could say is positive falls under this category, and we can use this sense of devotion and reverence to do it with true covenant. Someone texting, I see people smiling like you're texting behind my back or something. Or it's just I'm getting up my violin. It's my usual song. What is it?
That's almost impossible for us to not ever hate somebody or not dislike somebody. I mean, in reality, how can we even expect that of ourselves?
Okay, it's a detour, but I opened the door, so why not? Yeah. So you're right. The commandment to love every other Jew like you love yourself, it seems almost impossible. And remember, we did chapter 32. We went into depth about why we so flippantly throw that one off, but why it's so. There's three reasons it's impossible, right? First of all, if I don't like something, how can I love it? I can't teach myself to love what's that horrible vegetable that people put in Mexican food that tastes like soap to me?
Cilantro.
Cilantro.
I can't love cilantro. You give me $1 million a year from now, I can't pass a lie detector test saying I love cilantro. I don't, right? And I can't get myself to love it. So how can I be commanded to love someone that annoys me, right? 2, love every single Jew. I mean, yeah, I can love beautiful Jews and kind Jews, Jews that help me, that give me compliments. Oh, you have such a good voice. I love those Jews. But look, there's some people in the world we don't get along with. I love them, right? Every single person, every single neighbor, that's impossibility 2. And 3, not just love them like I love myself. Love them like I love myself. I love myself unconditionally. I overlook everything. I give myself every excuse. I'll get up in the middle of the night for anything I need. Just no conditions on how I love myself. That's how I have to love every other Jew. Love them, every Jew, unconditionally. Seems impossible. What does the Alter Rebbe say in chapter 32? I'll refer you back to that class. It's online. The only way we can do it is by saying, my identity is not my body. My identity is my soul. Again, my identity is not my body. My identity is my soul. So if I identify with my soul and I say that's who I am, now, the soul of someone else might be greater than me. I don't know. I can't see the level of their soul. So immediately I'll say, oh, I love this soul. There's such a high soul, such a high level, right? B, our souls are connected anyways. So to my soul, we're all one. And so loving them is like loving me. And from my soul's perspective, it's easy because how can I not get up in the middle of the night to help another soul? That's me. Of course I'll get up and help them. And 3, it's our body that is what divides us anyways, right? The only thing, I look around and I see so many people in the class right now, each one of us is having a different embodied experience. And psychologically, that reinforces that you're separate from me and there's a divide. So if I'm minimizing my body, now it's much easier to love another like myself. So if you review that chapter, you'll see there's tools in the Tanya to actually achieve what you rightly say seems like an absolute impossibility. And the more I identify as a soul rather than a body, the more it's just natural to love another actually like I love myself. Yeah?
What I find myself doing or try to do, because sometimes I can't get rid of those negative emotions, is I just try to stop and say, that person has God inside them, in their soul also.
Very good.
And there's got to be something good. I'm not seeing it at the moment, but there's got to be something there.
Absolutely. And that seems to be in line with what the Alter Rebbe is suggesting, because it's your soul that sees the good in everyone. It's your divine soul is only aware of the good in everyone. Your divine soul only sees everyone's behavior as divine providence. In my consciousness, that might be like a little still small voice or even buried, but that's the perspective of my divine soul. So when I reinforce that and I say, oh yeah, Michael consciousness, let me remind you that this other shape moving in front of you making sounds is also divine providence. I'm kind of coaxing that soul to be my identity, right? It's perfect. But it's work. It takes, as the Alter Rebbe will say, it takes repetition. That becomes my habit. Uchmama Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai L'Talmidav K'nistar L'El. This is in accord.
This is in
Go ahead.
Okay, this is in accord with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his disciples quoted above is, may it be God's will that the fear of heaven be upon you and keep you from sinning, like the fear of a human being who by observing your actions keeps you from sinning.
So remember, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who composed the Jerusalem Talmud, one of the greatest tzaddikim of his generation, probably the greatest tzaddik of his generation. And when he was passing away, the Alter Rebbe related the well-known story that his students came for a blessing, and Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I bless you to have fear of God as if just any passerby were looking at you, right? Fear of God like you fear another person. And they were aghast. They said, that's my big blessing, to have just pedestrian fear, like the postman's walking by or the milkman. to have that much fear? And he says, if only we had that level of fear. So it's that level of fear that's actually our barometer. We want our awareness of God's omniscience to cause me to check my own behaviors. And that's the barometer. The barometer is behavioral. It's a basic level of awe, and it's the same as social inhibition. I'm naturally inhibited in a crowd. I'm naturally inhibited when someone's watching me, and I function at a higher level than when no one's watching me. So this is just yira tata, lower level reverence, and we measure it by, am I now behaving the same as I would when social inhibition is affecting me? And I wouldn't knowingly lie in front of people, right? I wouldn't knowingly embarrass somebody. I wouldn't knowingly do something undignified. I check myself, right? So we're not looking for this higher level of awe, which is another subject we'll learn with other meditations. We're looking for a lower level of awe that, as I'll say, yes, for every Jew, that is an easy thing because we have this flow from Moshe and we can do our work. And he'll point now he'll go back to the quote that we used to describe Moshe speaking, and he'll point out that Moshe himself said to walk in all God's ways. That even Moshe at that time was inferring that this level of awe is judged by, does it cause me to behave differently? By walking in the ways of Judaism, now I see I have that lower level of awe. And that'll lead to more behavior, and that could lead to the higher level of awe, which is a separate subject.
This then is the meaning of the verse. God demands of you only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways.
Right, so that first question, that's all God asked of me? Is that such a small thing, to fear God? So we went through the whole conversation. Well, for Moshe it was, we have a ray from Moshe, we have a flow from Moshe, and tzaddikim in each generation, and we can meditate in this way. And the fear of God we're looking for is the lower level of fear that really is easy because of those factors. And what makes it easy is that all we need is to walk in God's ways, to have enough fear that I'm just going to do the right thing like someone's watching me. I think we can all relate to that feeling, and it just takes a certain amount of meditation to make those feelings as real as I feel about the eyes of some stranger in the supermarket or someone knocking on my door. Shehira hamavia likiyum mitzvotav yitbarech b'sur merah v'setov v'hi yira tata'ah haniskeret le'er. Go ahead, Ruth, for this fear.
Oh, for this is the fear that leads to the fulfillment of God's commandment, which involve turning away from evil and doing good. This is the lower level fear, which has been discussed earlier.
And so let's pick that up. We'll finish this thought. Let's do a quick meditation. We'll finish this thought when we start next week on top of 645 and move on to, there's two more ideas in this chapter. One, now how do we deal with the idea that we know God can see us, but we can't see God? So how do I overcome that? And finally, one last idea about accepting the yoke of the commandments. But we've gone through a lot today. So let's take a little posture. If this is your first time meditating, let's see if we can create an anchor for the rest of the day. If you've meditated this morning, let's just pick up where you left off and perhaps deepen those emotions. So wherever you are, find yourself in a comfortable seated position. A specific position is not important. I'll just ask you to not cross your arms or legs. And let your breathing slow down and deepen. Let the flesh drop from your spine. Spine is long, held up as if hanging from a string high above you. All the flesh just hanging loosely off of that. Smooth skin, relaxed muscles. Open up our breathing for 4 counts for each stage of breathing. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath in, 2, 3. Release it back out, 2, 3, 4. Remain empty, 2, 3. Starting over, breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Keep that delicious breath in. 2, 3, 4. Expelling. 2, 3, 4. Stay empty. 2. And bring your belly in. Breathe in. Belly expand. Stay expanded. And your belly rises up. Touch your diaphragm. Breathe out. Stay empty. Just keep that cycle however is comfortable for you, breathing 4 counts through each stage. Let's open up our wisdom gateway. That is the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. That is our wisdom gateway. Just open it and try and stay there as you flow through the rest of the breath cycle. And in that wisdom gateway, let's place this concept. God is aware of everything I'm thinking, feeling, doing. Watching to see if I do the right thing at every moment. Make it very, very personal. God's not watching from a distance. God's watching right here, right in this room, right in my own, the thoughts I'm having, the feelings I'm having. If you're watching that idea on a screen that is black and white, maybe make it color. If it's a little spot in your mind's eye, make it a big Omnimax screen in your mind's eye, and involve yourself in it. It's not a disassociated relationship. It is actually you, right? This is me, be that God is watching right now. Just keep that meditation in your mind, in the wisdom gateway. Let the details fill in. Know that this is a dot meditation, so it's not about figuring it out. It's just about making that something that's real to me and spending time with this concept so that it affects me. As you hold it in your wisdom gateway, notice any feelings of reverence, of awe, of, ooh, think about what I did this morning already today, and that when I let God down, or what challenges may be ahead of me. Perhaps the opposite. Think about how I overcame something and did the right thing, and positive feeling may flow from that. But I want those feelings to charge themselves up for the rest of the day. I can come back to this space anytime I need inspiration, anytime I need strength. Let that feeling of reverence flow into everything I think, say, and I do for the rest of the day. If you're online, feel free to pause, and this is a great meditation to stay in for any amount of time, whatever feels like a regular big hour for you, so to speak. If you're with us in class, our time is up, so please open our eyes and come back together. Thank you for joining us. We're going to sign off Facebook, but if you'd like to join our class, you're most welcome. Please email maya@temple-israel.org. It's been a pleasure learning with you, and we'll see you again at our next class.